All right, well, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So if you're a first-time sales hacker joining our webinar, give us a second. We'll explain how we do things around here. If you've been with us before, you probably know the routine, but please bear with us. So a couple of things. We're very excited to have this session today about measuring key metrics for sales and having it being sponsored by Conga, which is a brand that I've gotten to know and follow for the last several years. We were just talking about the old brand versus the new one. So it's fun to see them evolve in lots of different ways. But before we do that, I want to remind people, please, there's a question section on GoToWebinar. So please, as you have questions, put them in live in the moment, because we want to speak to those questions while we're talking about a specific topic, not necessarily take them at the end of the webinar. We will do Q&A at the end as more questions come up, but please feel free to do that. Also, we're big fans of having people just go into the chat feature or the question feature and just introduce yourself. Let us know the name of your company. If you have something that you're looking forward to getting out of this webinar, put something in there. We try to make these a little bit more social than just, two voices behind computer screens talking at you. We want to talk with you about different things. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and introduce Bobby from Conga. And Bobby, I'm not even going to attempt to mispronounce your name. So. Which
no worries.
Hear all the time. How do we say it?
Yeah. It's Edmundowicz, or if you're Polish, Edmundowicz.
All right. Okay.
There you go. No, thanks for having me. We're really, Diana on our marketing team and myself have been really excited about attending this webinar and providing content for it. And we're just really excited to be able to present today. So thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, I think the first question we all have is, if you were at Exactly, why are you still working? Are you in IPO? Like, aren't you done? Didn't you finish it?
I think there's always opportunity to repeat success. And I think what was really cool about the Exactly experience was that I was able to learn a lot from a number of great sales leaders that has really helped kind of shape the way that we've evolved and kind of built out our sales organization at Conga. So I think that's actually a pretty good, segue into me and who I am and why I'm talking today. And I think, to take a further step back, for me, Exactly was that first opportunity, that real opportunity in my career where I was able to come in, have a variety of different direct sales roles and sales leadership roles, and really kind of cut my teeth in the software as a service industry, and particularly in the Salesforce industry. I was just so enthralled with Exactly's culture and the way that they helped us individuals grow and take on more opportunity. And I learned a couple of really cool lessons from Exactly. One of them, I think, was from our CEO, Chris Cabrera, and he always talked about always looking to reinvent yourself. And I think for anybody out there that's interested in trying to have success at multiple levels in an organization, the way that you approach your job as a direct contributor versus a manager versus a director is different. And you have to be comfortable and have to be okay with finding ways to constantly look to reinvent yourself. And put yourself in scenarios where you might be uncomfortable, but that push you.
That's great. And I know we're not here to talk about Exactly, but I am curious because I think it does give some context for the audience. You were there for 6 years. When you first started at Exactly, how big was Exactly versus obviously when you left, it was IPO, right? But where did you start? Because I think that gives us some great context of the experience you've had.
Yeah, that's good. Good point. So when I started, we had 75 employees globally. I was one of 3 sales development reps at the company. At the time, we had a San Jose office. I believe we had an office in India as well, where our co-founder had some office space, and I believe we had an EMEA office. But it was a 75-person company, and I started off as a sales development role. So lead qualification and outbound prospecting were the two main parts of my day.
So that's great, and I think it's really nice to hear someone. Because I don't know that we hear these success stories, and maybe we should talk about that more in general in our community, but it's nice to see one go from SDR to now you're a VP of commercial business, and on top of that, you went through an IPO, et cetera. We do have a question of where were you prior to exactly, but before we, rather than dive into that, and Benjamin, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to get to the presentation. I would encourage people to go, check out Bobby's LinkedIn profile a little bit and see if there's, something there that you want to ask about. Because I want to get into the presentation about metrics, because that's what we're really here to talk about today. But Bobby, thanks for taking a minute or two and just putting some context around where you've come from, because I think it speaks volumes to what you can bring to all of us and help us all learn. And whether it's helping us reinvent our brand, we're also going to have to reinvent some of our processes if we're going to succeed. And I think that's probably the best segue for us to go ahead and move forward with this discussion.
Yeah. Well, I'll just do kind of get two points on that.
Sure.
I think first point is, when I graduated college, moved to the Bay Area, I actually was in a wine distribution company, and they kept the company was kind of Excel based, and there was a lot of error in their calculations, particularly around commissions. And when I was also coaching youth sports at the time, I found one of the people that I coached, their father was a senior vice president at Salesforce and was in charge of recruiting companies to the App Exchange, where he knew of exactly. And I told him about my commission issue. He said, "Well, I know this great software company. I know the CEO. Let me introduce you." And that's kind of how I got into SaaS software. And
cool.
I actually close with Matt and connect with him regularly as one of my mentors. Without him and without the sport of lacrosse, I wouldn't have found SaaS software, got into that. And then just to provide some more context as we're thinking through, it might help the audience maybe ask specific questions. So from exactly went from 75 employees to about 400. We went through an IPO. I moved out to Denver, Colorado to help build out exactly's Denver office. Me and one of the other reps and our VP and then head of sales moved out, the three of us. And when we left exactly, there's a 75-person sales office there. When we moved out, we were focused on building out a new market in the Salesforce ecosystem for sales compensation software, which was primarily the SMB and mid-market region. So we helped figure out how to sell to that space. We built a product that was identified in that space and really went to market and went after it. And then in my time at Exactly, we then kind of morphed and started selling every product and selling to all types of companies, large and small. So that's kind of the experience set there. When I came to Conga, I was actually Conga's first direct sales manager or leader, or I came in as a director, but at the time, Conga had been around for about 10 years, and it's an amazing story where they basically, when I came on, already had 7,000 customers, and they didn't have a sales team. The reason they were able to have all that success is because they built an amazing product that absolutely worked, and they just took care of customers. So by having that customer-first mentality, they were able to build up to 7,000 customers and 41 of the Fortune 100. They were acquired by Insight Ventures out of New York, and Insight brought in Bob DeSantis and Matt Schultz from former DocuSign leadership to come in and help kind of build the company. And I had a relationship with Bob that I actually started off back at Exactly in 2009, and he pinged me to come over here. So when I showed up, there wasn't a direct sales organization. I basically inherited 6 business analysts who were customer success focused, and then kind of helped evolve over the last 2 years into now right around a 60-person sales organization. And we now have about 120 people selling at Conga globally. So that might be some good context just in terms of the question.
No, I think that's great. No, I think that's really, really great. So thank you so much for sharing that and giving us this context. So let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about measuring our sales process and why this is so important.
Yeah, so I think, to be able to evolve and adapt, I think we have to first have a base layer of where we are and where we're trying to go. And we have to be able to understand the metrics of our business in a way that helps us consistently see maybe trends or opportunities for us to dive into. I think as a organization, it's important to understand your metrics and to identify those key ones, because what it really does is kind of gives you that roadmap of where have we come from and where have we evolved to, and then where could we go. And if you can do this well, you can also then help justify things that will help you provide funding or get funding requests when needed, or support from other parts of the organization when needed, to make sure that we're growing. You're growing in the right types of ways. So what I'm here to talk about is kind of that entire process. The first part of that is really trying to measure. Well, first it's really identifying the key metrics. The second part of that is once you've kind of identified them, you have to have a system to be able to track those metrics, which is obviously key. We'll talk a little bit about that. The third is once you understand the metrics, you want to be able to identify your conversion rates. Conversion rates and the change of those rates can really help you identify some of the trends or areas to potentially improve upon. Once you get a good understanding of that, how can you help drive repeatability and predictability across your business? And then, how do you optimize it? Once you have repeatability and predictability, what are some ways that you can kind of drive change across the organization? So that's really the areas that we're going to talk about today, supporting the major theme of the presentation. When you think about what are the most important metrics of your sales process, I think Richard and I were talking before, and you posed the question: what's the difference between a metric and a key performance indicator? I think one of the processes that we go through at Conga is every single month we go through a monthly operating review where we go through, a massive slide deck that breaks down every part of our organization into a variety of metrics to figure out where we see trends or opportunities to improve. For me, the difference between a metric and a key performance indicator is that at any given point, you probably want to have a couple KPIs or a couple key performance indicators that you can watch and monitor. And as long as those are tracking in the right ways, or you're seeing similar or good results with those key performance indicators, those are really the key areas that drive your business. Those are the ones that you want to make sure that you're close to. But then underneath that, there's probably a variety of metrics that you can dive into. An example would be, for me, one of my key performance indicators is how much sales accepted pipeline we create on a given period. And I look at that sometimes, at least a couple times a week, if not daily, just to see how much pipeline we're adding. Then if for some reason we're not adding enough pipeline, I will look under that and look into different sources of pipeline or different teams of where pipeline's being added, which are all metrics, but not probably the key performance indicator of adding pipeline. So hopefully that provides some context.
Yeah, so what might be some of those, and again, just because you brought up this KPI, and I appreciate you bringing that in, right? So I think that's great. Like some people, they love to say, well, I measure how much pipeline we grew. But I love the fact that you've got even more specific on not just how much pipeline, but how much was sales accepted pipeline, right? So for me, yeah, it almost sounds like you got to have some pretty strong definitions in your SLAs between marketing on sales qualified leads, SLAs with the SDR team, if you have an SDR or BDR team, on what they can then throw over the fence, and then what is truly a sales accepted lead. So as you start talking about metrics, are you really talking about identifying those key pieces even before the metric itself? Like, is that part of the formula?
Yeah, I think that absolutely is part of the formula, and that kind of leads into a couple of our key metrics here. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're trying to ask is, you have to find a set of definitions within a process or within an organization that are things that you deem important to track.
Right.
And then once you have those things that you track, those kind of become your KPIs, your key performance indicators. Mm-hmm. And then the subset below that is really different types of metrics that can drive that. And mm-hmm. To be considered an operator, somebody who knows how to operate or improve upon their business, you need to be able to know how to drive those metrics and affect those metrics to drive the key performance indicators to then drive the success of the organization.
Sure.
Helpful?
That's super helpful. And I'm going to keep digging in on you a little bit, and I apologize. But, so I love the fact that you have this sort of sales accepted lead, right? Like that's a good KPI, and that's good at the top of the funnel, right? What are the things you look at in the middle of the funnel for a KPI? Is it length of time in a certain stage? Is it how fast it's moving through different stages, or are there other? I'm just trying to give people ideas and hints of things that they could look at in their own sales process.
Yeah, I think that, so first off, I think when you're thinking about KPIs and metrics, they have to be relevant to your business,
Right.
right? When we were at Exactly, we were selling, in our SMB space, so sub 500 employees. Our deal size, our deal lengths were probably 45 days, 60 days, right? When I came to Conga, our deal size, and the sizes were probably $20,000 for a full contract, right? When I came to Conga, Conga was a much more transactional business model. I mean, we were getting 600 to 700 to 800 leads every month, and we were closing $2,000. Well, at the time it was $900 deals, but we were closing, 70, 80, 90 transactions a month. So the metrics that are more important to Conga would be a little bit different than Exactly, because you have to take into some of the factors around deal size and length and complexity to really help you identify the right metrics for you to track,
Mm-hmm.
or the KPIs for you to track.
Yep.
So for me, when I think about the sales process, I think there's a couple of key steps in the sales process. There's obviously, leads being created in the system. There's a process where somebody or some system are identifying those leads as kind of good or not, or ready to be acted on or not. There's then some sort of a step where an actual quota-carrying salesperson is engaged. In some areas, in some parts, some companies, you'll have the salesperson doing all of those three things. In some companies, depending on volumes and complexities, you might have different people doing those different things. So once you have the salesperson engaged, that's what I call sales accepted. The next step would be sales qualified. So we have gone through a variety of steps or presentations or certain things in the sales process where we now know that this is a further, more likely to close opportunity down the process, and that's sales qualified. And then there's obviously the close. So you asked a great question, which was about time, and that's absolutely a measure that we look at. I mean, if you have an average sales cycle of 45 days and you have opportunities that are in there that are over 60 days old, that's probably an indicator to you that that pipeline is growing stale, right? So there's different ways to slice that data to then figure out what's realistic, which helps you then think about predictability and those types of things.
Yeah. Now, people, I have this statement that, if you look at your pipeline and you've got anything that's double your average sales cycle, all those deals have to be killed and started over. Like, you got to force people to close them. And you'd be surprised how quickly the pipeline cleans up. So.
Yeah, right. Or I think the other important thing is that data isn't really just the end all be all. I think you also have to understand what's happening in the business. So if things are happening in the business, like you are going up market and selling to large organizations, obviously the age has to change, right? The age will probably get bigger. Or if you're selling a different type of solution, maybe a solution that's a more complex sales cycle, like the Exactly solution versus the typical versus the data solution or document solution that we were selling when I got to Conga, you would expect to have a bigger, a longer age to close. So I think what's important is that the metrics can always be guiding light, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but you also want to understand what's happening in the business and what's really driving the metrics, what's affecting them before you can really understand and act as a leader.
That's great. Okay, I kind of interrupted your presentation, so I'll turn it back over to you. Sorry.
No worries. So I think basically what we just talked about are two other areas that I think are important to understand when you're thinking about your metrics as a sales leader. It's obviously you have to identify the key parts of your sales process, and the parts of your sales process are things that need to be relevant to what you're selling and the complexity of what you're selling and how technical or not technical your sale is. Those things are key. But then I think there's other things that are pretty standard from a deal metrics perspective, like the age of the opportunities, the size of the opportunities, and then just the quantity. Those are three things that are important. For instance, as let's just say you're deciding to go after a bigger segment, and your deal sizes are taking twice as long, but the booked amount is actually 3 times as much. Well, If you think about that, that ratio of bookings growth to age is a good equation for you. If it's the reverse and your deals are taking twice as long, yet what you're getting out of it is not twice as much of a booking, then that's probably not a good equation for you. You have to figure out and understand, is that really where I want to be spending time and resources if I'm getting less return for, you know, for the same investment? And sure, there's a lot of different things that go into the investment. You can kind of debate that, but I think just from a high level, those are important things to understand. The other thing is, when you're thinking about the segmentation that you're selling into, so when you think about the size of an organization, revenue of the organization, region, there's different nuances to how you go to market. I've learned a lot from our sales leader who runs EMEA for our organization, and when he has a French region, a DACH region, which is Germany and some of the other countries in that area, or England. I mean, the way that they go to market and approach those three different regions is different because of the way that companies evaluate and buy solutions there. So it's really important to understand these different areas of your organization as a sales leader to then help you identify, what are the things that you want to be tracking, what are the things that you want to be metricing, to then help you understand consistency and scaling as you grow.
Yeah, no, I agree. I tell people this all the time when they're selling to different regions, even in the United States. Google selling to Northerners or selling to Southerners or selling to APAC, because someone's written something about these people and their trends. And while we don't want to sort of always, follow, the standardization and put everybody in the same bucket, it's very important to know. I remember. For me, I even said, I grew up in Macon, Georgia, and I said, I want to see what they say about selling to people like me. So selling to a Southerner. And it was just very interesting. It's very eye-opening for you to decide. I think you were talking about earlier today about, always honing your brand. Well, you should know where you come from as much as you know where you're going. So I love the fact that you're putting in that level of research. We've got a great question coming from Brant. I think this is an excellent question, which is how or what do you find is the most or best method to zero in on the most important metric, right? So I think he's asking, how do you figure out what's the earliest identifiable indicator of the metrics you should be solving or looking for? And then the second part of that question, I think this is equally as important, is who gets to decide if that's the key metric, right? Is it the sales manager? Is it the VP of sales? Is it the CEO? Like, who are those things? So can you maybe explain how you guys identified this stuff? And, was it you?
Yeah.
Was it you? Did you have a team? Who was on the team?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I think the earliest desirable really, again, it depends. I mean, for me, what I look at as my earliest desirable, so I can give you the context of what we're doing and why we're doing it, is sales accepted. The reason why we do that is an opportunity in our business could come from 4 different channels. It could come from marketing, it could come from outbound prospecting or sales. It could come from our systems integrators channel. We have a great channel of SIs out there that leverage Conga in their implementation, so we could get an opportunity coming from there. We can get an opportunity from one of our partners like Salesforce.com that might be different than an SI. So for us, if you have 4 different types of channels driving opportunities come into your funnel, really for me, the moment once a salesperson has spoken to that opportunity and has a scheduled next step, to me that's the earliest KPI that I'm looking at. The reason why is there's different metrics in those different channels that are important to each of them. That are a little bit different. So for me, the sales accepted opportunity in our process is the most important metric, and that's one of the things that I use that's the metric that I'm constantly looking at multiple times a week, if not daily, to see how much sales accepted opportunities are we adding into the pipeline. And we'll talk more about the conversion methodology and why. The second thing you talked about was besides that. Well,
right.
I think as we are talking about sales, right? This is the sales part of kind of metrics and driving your business. So relative to sales, your sales leader needs to be the person driving the strategy. Right? If you think about a sales organization and you have different roles and different levels within that organization, the vice president of sales should be somebody that's qualified and able to set the strategy for the organization. That's really their job. They need to be looking 1 to 2 to 3 quarters out to make sure that they're putting themselves in a great position to have success in the future, right? The director is more the person driving the day-to-day across the organization. The managers are managing the day-to-day across each team, and then the individual contributors are driving the number. So for me, who decides that? I think it really depends on your company. Obviously, if it's a 5-person company and you guys are just kind of getting going, obviously the CEO is probably part of the sales team at that point, right?
Right.
So different organization sizes have different ways that I would answer that. But I would, in an organization that has a sales org and a sales leader, it's up to the sales leader to drive strategy in the organization.
So let me follow up on that. So let's say you're at a more mature company like a Conga or an Exactly, where you do have sort of an SDR or BDR team. I understand that as your role, as Bobby's role, you're looking at sales accepted leads. But shouldn't each part of the sales team know that they have a different KPI or metric they need to follow? So for you, it's sales accepted lead. For the SDR or BDR leader, they should be identifying the things that matter to them so that conversion happens well, correct?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for them, it's how many meetings are we setting, right? What's the conversion from meeting to sales accepted? If
Right.
a certain rep may be setting a lot of meetings, but they're not being accepted, are they not properly qualifying, or are they not properly setting expectations before that meeting? Those are all things that we dig into. But yeah, you're spot on. I mean, the sales development team, their closed won deal is a sales accepted opportunity, right?
Yep.
So there's then metrics prior to that, like call volume, how many conversations you're having a day, that then lead into them creating sales accepted ops.
That's great. All right. Cool. Thank you. And by the way, thank you, Brant, for your question.
Yeah. Thanks, Brandon. That was a good question. And the second part is, once you understand the metrics, you really have to have a system to track, and that system needs to be able to provide consistency. You need to make sure that it's going to provide accuracy, and that you're able to scale. So when I say consistency and accuracy, obviously if you're tracking metrics where people can go in and make changes to them, that's going to hurt your ability to see trends. Also, if you're tracking metrics, but as your organization scales and you realize that you need to add a couple more pieces to the puzzle, you need to be able to do that. So for us, I mean, both at Exactly and at Conga, we lived on Planet Salesforce. Our Salesforce team at Conga always talks about how we live on Planet Salesforce. And for us, Salesforce.com was the CRM that we used at both organizations. And at Conga, all of the solutions and products that we have and position are all geared around the Salesforce ecosystem. And they do help people track and measure and provide efficiencies and those types of things. So, for me, that's the platform that we've used. But whether you use Salesforce or not, the really key part is that the system that you're using gives you consistent and accurate information, and that you can adapt it and scale it to your requirements as you grow.
I would agree. And I think there's, I'll even sort of say it in a different way, which is, as much as you implement a system, you better have a good process and you better be addicted to that process, right? When you build this system that you're going to start tracking, right, how long does it take for you to go from this hypothesis of here's the system we're going to do, and then to getting to a place where it's like, okay, now we actually trust the process, right? Because we all start with a system or a process, and for lack of a better word, it's a hypothesis until we can prove it out, right? And even if we prove that we're wrong, if our hypothesis is wrong, that's great information. How long in your mind, like, you're coming into a Conga, did it take you 3 or 6 months to figure this out? Was it because of your experience at Exactly you could do this in a month? Are you still figuring it out, or you're always, are you always questioning yourself?
Yes, the last. No, we're always looking for ways to improve, constantly trying to adapt. And one of our core values is adapt to win, and we're constantly looking for ways to adapt our process and our approach to improve the results of our organization. So that's an ongoing thing, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. But for us, when I came into Conga, we had no sales organization. There were some really key wins, and how I was able to identify those key wins was I spent time listening in on calls and sitting with the people that were managing the sales process, people that were taking leads and converting them. So just by sitting down with them, seeing their day-to-day, understanding all of the things that they did, how those calls went, there were some pretty quick wins for us, primarily around segmenting out roles and responsibilities. Instead of having one person doing 4 or 5 different roles, creating role-specific scenarios. That was a big part of it. Part of it was identifying a qualification process and making sure that we weren't spending time with everything, but we were spending time with the right things. And those two, within the first 3 months, we were able to see some pretty strong results, like cutting our deal age in half and doubling our close deal size, right? So again, back to some of the metrics that I talked about, deal age, deal size, those types of things. When you see changes happening with those types of metrics, you can typically understand that you're probably on a good path. But I mean, if you go into a company that has a 12-month sales cycle and large complex deals, you probably won't see change right away. So you have to understand the situation that you're in to have realistic expectations on when you would see different results.
That's
Answer
awesome.
your question.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great answer. Thank you very much. Let's go forward.
So then, when you think about your methodology, I think what's really important is to, one, pick a relevant timeline. So when you think about what we talked about, whether it's large complex deals, whether it's short transactional deals, you have to pick a timeline that makes sense. Because at Conga we have a monthly driven business. For us, the month was the right timeline to pick. The second part is then the conversion methodology. There's really 2 types of conversion methodologies that I'm familiar with and I pay attention to, but I'm more passionate about one than the other. There's in-month conversion methodology, which means that I'm tracking how many things happen in a given period and then trying to figure out the conversion between how many sales accepted ops happened in a period to how many sales qualified ops happened in a period. The other methodology is a waterfall methodology. So that's saying at one point in time, like if I look at one campaign that we ran in March, how many deals converted from that one campaign, right? I'm more passionate about the first one, particularly in a sales organization, because if you're constantly trying to drive how much you're adding to your pipeline in a given period and you can predict a given result off of that, it then provides you month over month predictability. But those are really the 2 methods that people would try to think about when they're thinking about their conversion methodology. A waterfall methodology would be good if you're trying to say, at Dreamforce, we got 10,000 leads last year, and out of Dreamforce, we closed $10 million, right? Next year at Dreamforce, we're going to get 15,000 leads. We should expect to close $15 million. If not, how do we execute either well or not well on that event, right? That's a different type of a methodology. So that's important to understand that. Once you understand that, obviously calculating the important conversion rates, and I'll give you an example of some of this, I believe on my next slide. And then once you are able to calculate their conversion rates, then it's about identifying trends. So that's kind of how I would think through crafting a conversion methodology. To give you an example, this is the in-month conversion methodology. So on the left side of the screen, you can see 4 things. You can see CR, which stands for opportunities being created. For us, that's our marketing qualified step. When it becomes an MQL, they create an op for us and send it over. The next one's sales accepted. So a sales accepted opportunity. One below that is a closed opportunity. So this is just talking about units. And as you can see in July, there were 338 created and 106 closed. In August, there were 381 created and 123 closed. An important thing that's kind of hard for some people to get their head around when you're thinking about the in-month conversion rate is that the 123 opportunities that closed in August, some of those could have been created in July. And a lot of times in the sales cycle, that's 45 days that happens, right? So when you look on the left side, you can see, obviously, how many times something happened in a given period. And on the right side, you can then see the conversions off of that. right? So what's my created to close, SAO to close, SQO to close, and created to SAO? Now, what's interesting is in the graph below, I mean, you can see some consistency, right? You can see some consistency that I know that if I create 100 opportunities on average in that same period, I'll close about 36% or 36 opportunities out of that 100. The one metric that I think was interesting on this slide was our created to sales accepted had dropped in August, and when I looked into what had caused that, it was just a little bit of a change in one of the questions that we were asking in our qualification process for our SDR team, right? So let me pause there. There might be some questions. Richard, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, I had a question. So because here's the interesting thing. If you had a drop, could it have been a positive drop? Meaning all of a sudden your SDR was able to get rid of stuff that shouldn't have been meetings in the first place, right?
Yep.
So in some cases we would say, hey, we changed the question, let's not ask that question because we saw it drop, and maybe that's good. But also, was it a good question to change, or was it not? I guess that's the question I would be asking is, if they're not sending over stuff we shouldn't be talking to, as you said, let's talk to the right people, not all the people. Was that change actually a good benefit? Was that a good drop, for lack of a better description?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think anytime you see any type of an indication in a trend, it's important for you to then dig into it and verify that what you're assuming happened actually was the case, right? So in that example, it was understanding the change in the questioning and then looking at the associated opportunities that came out of it and seeing what happened in the future based off those opportunities to then say, you know what, that change was a good change or a wrong one. I mean, the data, you can't just drive the business off of data. The data kind of gives you ideas of where to look into, and it's important for us leaders to then dig in a layer or two below that to then figure out what's causing that. And then once you understand what's causing that, is that okay or is it not okay? If it's not okay, what's the action plan to go resolve that?
Right.
Make sense?
It does. It does. Great. Cool.
So once you understand some of the metrics of your business, like back on this slide, on average, our created to close was a 36% over these 3 months periods. So if I'm thinking about predicting my business for October, I can assume that if I create 100 opportunities, I'll close 36 of them, right? And then you can start to understand, okay, well, how many of these things do I need to do in a given period to have this outcome, right? That's one of the ways that you can help get predictability around it. Second one is once you understand that key KPI, like for us, it's the volume of sales accepted opportunities, you can start to track it in a given period and see, like, okay, am I going to be on track for my finish, whether that's in a month or a quarter or so have you. Right? So by being able to understand that, you can then go back and make changes or do campaigns or do certain things that would affect your ability to still hit the desired outcome, because you know during the period what's happening. And the last part is that you can basically drive the outcome. So one, you'll know once you have your conversions figured out. One, you'll know how much goes in, like what you need to go in to your business for the result to come out. Two, you'll be able to then track it hopefully in more of a real-time fashion to make sure that you're staying on track with it. And three, if you identify that you're off track, you can then figure out ways to then get yourself back on track. That's really how you can create repeatability and predictability in your business, right? I guess like it's not like in any sales organization, it's not like you can just set it and forget it. There's always tweaks and changes and things that you're always kind of look at to try to improve upon. But by being able to understand what's happening in the business on a frequent basis, you can then figure out which changes you need to go enact and how to make those changes to have those results.
Yeah, I always tell people that, in sales, you're probably in one of the most paranoid positions in the company, right? Because even when we're performing, we still get afraid that we missed something, right? We can hit our goal and go, oh my God, that's not possible. What did I do wrong? we're just always questioning ourselves. So I love the fact that you have that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a healthy sense of sense of paranoia is important when you're thinking about deals or you're thinking about, how you're going to get there. It was funny, our chief revenue officer, my boss, Alan, before we really had some more of the structure built out, when we identified that we might be slow on a month, the strategy was like, okay, let's just go try 10 things and see what sticks. I mean, we didn't try to do too much where it was painful for the sales team, but maybe those 10 things would have been, okay, I'm going to try a sales incentive on a pricing incentive on a certain product. I'm going to try driving a webinar or a campaign to try to drive flow. I'm going to try to, go back to close loss opportunities and call down that list. But, at that point in time, early on, when we were still building a lot of this, we just didn't know what exactly the right levers to pull were. So we just did a lot. And luckily, we were able to get enough done that would drive our success. So back to that. So when you think about optimizing this, once you understand the trends, like if I know that it's something's improving or not improving, and I understand that trend, I can then dig into it and try to understand what's causing that. Once I have a good understanding of that, there's really a couple of different ways that you can take action plans. The first one is sales strategy. So to me, a strategy change would be, we're going to segment our account executive team from 0 to 5,000 and break it in half, because we're seeing that the deal motion in a smaller company is different than a deal motion in a higher company, right? So we're going to have some sales strategy changes to help hone in and improve results in certain areas. The second one could be sales coaching, right? So now, because we have a new product, we're seeing that the sales cycles are longer, which means that we probably have to get tighter on our selling method, particularly around business case on ROI discussions, to ensure that we still have a good close rate at the higher end on some of these transactions, right? That would be an example of a sales coaching plan to implement. The other one could be a new marketing campaign. Maybe you're identifying that your close rates coming from a certain channel are great, or a certain persona are great. So now that we understand that, let's go drive more campaigns or ways to identify people to go get those personas or those industries that are relevant to your success. Next one could be pricing and packaging. Maybe what you're seeing is there's a when positioned separately, the majority of deals actually are purchased separately, but you're starting to see that maybe there's one person that's deal size is growing, and it's because they're finding a way to bundle in 2 or 3 different products. Maybe there's a pricing and a packaging strategy that you can implement across the whole team, so you can increase everybody's deal size by even 10 points, which would be meaningful, right?
Go ahead. Finish that out, because I want to have something to say. Go ahead.
The last one is just cross-functional support. So once you understand your business and you understand what's going on with it, it's great to be able to take that information and to provide it to your partners, right? Like for us, one of our big partners is marketing, and being able to help provide our marketing team, here's what's happening, here's the conversion rates, here's what we're seeing, here's where you can help us the most, right? So when you think about trying to optimize your business, it's being able to take the results and take the trends and then provide that back into the organization in ways to help ensure that you're getting the support that your team needs to help have success, and vice versa. So,
yeah, it's interesting, because I was talking to Bob Marsh over at Level 11 the other day, and we were talking about metrics and KPIs and the communication of this, which is so critical, right? Because all this planning that you walked us through today will be worthless if we don't actually communicate it well. So I think my question for you is, how often are you coaching to this with your strategy and coaching with your team, right? Because all this other stuff is great, but if we're not communicating it in a way to the team on a regular basis, you can, that's where the gap's going to fall, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think So now my immediate team is a subset of managers that manage the direct sellers across their group, right? So, we're meeting weekly and we're talking about some of the KPIs and the strategies, and we're collaborating is that we're able to have improvement in success across KPIs across different teams. Like, one of our managers was trying to figure out ways to help drive pipeline creation, and he he created a situation where two of his reps would team up. He would have somebody that was doing a good job creating pipeline and somebody that wasn't, and they would get into a room together to then trade off calls and provide feedback kind of in a one-to-one peer coaching setting, which was a really effective way that he was then driving that KPI for his team. So then we were able to then take that and then adapt it into the other groups who've been using it kind of sporadically as necessary, right? So for me, I'm meeting with my team as a group, and we have a monthly cadence that we go through as a leadership team. And there's expectations around what they're doing with their teams to help improve upon this stuff.
Yep. Do you do, just out of curiosity, do you do any level of sort of, for lack of a better word, the whole gamification thing? Because these KPIs and metrics are so important, particularly as you've nailed them, right? How are you actually measuring those within your own Salesforce instance? Is it just, dashboards for the reps and management, or is it, do you have a gamification system? Like, what are you guys doing to help reinforce it aside from the one-on-one coaching, right?
So you said a couple of things. So for me, and this isn't meant to be a plug in any way, but I leverage our tool Action Grid. Action Grid gives you a ton of flexibility with how you can massage and look at data in your Salesforce instance. So that's what I use and my sales managers use to dig into pipeline and to dig in things like that.
Right.
We use Hoopla. We were going through a trial today of that tool, which provides, basically ESPN-like,
Yep.
dashboards on TV screens, which are in each of our sales areas. So the team's using that and has had some success with that.
That's great. No, I think those are the things, right? Like, it's one thing for us as managers to sit here and sort of dictate from the dashboard, as I love to say, but it's another thing to provide some tools, whether it's a Hoopla or Action Grid or Level 11, to let the reps be able to motivate themselves a little bit, right? Because at the end of the day, there's got to be some level of self-motivation. But I love the fact that it's not just this top-down philosophy, right? Like, you're not just sort of, the beatings will continue until morale improves approach. So I'm glad to hear that. Right. Yeah. Only a sales leader can say those things, right? Got a couple questions from
just on that point, though, I think what's really important when rolling out changes and things of that nature is really trying to get feedback or an understanding from the team to help them get bought into it. One of the books that I read is Daniel Pink wrote a book called Drive, and there's really 3 characteristics that can help improve drive and motivation across an organization. And it's not just for sales, but it's really the autonomy, so giving people some of the autonomy to get their job done. It's helping them have a sense of the mastery, so helping them have a say in how they're getting it done, and then making sure they understand the purpose that they're trying to that they have in the organization. So yeah, we're big on that. I mean, we're big on culture, and we want to make sure that we don't have just a top-down approach.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, I think that's great. We got a couple of other great questions from the audience, so please keep them coming. We've only got 1 or 2 more slides, so I want to finish the slides, and then we'll sort of run into these. These are great general Q&A anyway. So let's go ahead.
Do this. Yeah, the last slide that I have is just a picture or a cartoon that Diana had put together for us when building the presentation. I think is kind of relevant, right? I think without having predictability, without having understanding of your KPIs, you then could be that person sitting in the boardroom not able to articulate why things aren't working out. And I remember my first time I met our current CEO, he he told me, he's like, listen, it's okay. It's not okay to miss, but if you miss, it's okay as long as you have an action plan. You just keep not have an action. I think as leaders, it's really important for us that if we are not living up to what we're expected to do, we have to have a good understanding of what's happening and be able to have an action plan of what you're doing to solve it. If you don't have those two things, then you might not be in a leadership position for much longer, to be honest. So it's important to think about that stuff when you're thinking about your business, and having this level of predictability can help you, or an understanding of your business and your KPIs and all those things will help you have success or be able to answer the question if you're not.
Yeah, no, that's great. So people, obviously here's where people can get a hold of you. You want to let people know what Get Conga is. Like, you've given us an hour of your time. By all means, let them know what you do.
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, so Conga had been around for about 10 years before I joined, and the main product that they had was a document creation solution. So some of the main use cases for that were people that bought Salesforce and had trouble building quotes or presentations or proposals, and we basically create a one-click button option that can consolidate data from Salesforce and present it in really any type of document you want. That's really the tool that Conga had been providing to the ecosystem for 10 years before I showed up. Over the last couple of years, we have both acquired and developed technology, and really what we're all about is helping companies more effectively leverage Salesforce to improve business processes. So I mentioned a tool, Action Grid, that allows us to more easily get at the data in Salesforce. We have a tool called Conga Contracts, and we've been kind of going into the contract lifecycle management space, so anything from contract creation to negotiation to storage, and to really helping companies leverage the data within their contracts to drive their business, and that's been a huge hit over the last couple of months, and there's more coming from Conga, so be on the lookout. But really the key is, if you use Salesforce and you haven't talked to anybody from Conga, you owe it to yourself to at least talk to somebody, understand different ways that we might be able to help your business.
Yeah, great. And like I promised, we got a couple of questions from the audience. So, one of the questions coming from Brian, it's a great question, is how do we apply these same concepts in a more limited market of opportunities and slower selling cycles due to significant sales size, right? So, you've talked about this from the 45-ish day sales cycle. How would you approach this from the 90, 180 day sales cycle, right? Where those deals are now going to be 6-figure or even 7-figure deals that we just know naturally take longer because there's so many decision makers, right?
Yeah.
Any thoughts or advice around that from your experience?
Yeah, so when I was at Exactly, and even now today at Conga, a lot of the things that we had applied for our SMB, SMB business, when then up-leveled to our kind of our enterprise business, apply. The difference is just the way that you look at the metrics and the time frame that you look at them. So for instance, if I'm looking at a company that has an average sales cycle of 6 months, I would be measuring in 6-month increments. So I would be looking at how much pipeline I was adding in 6 months relative to how much was closed in that 6-month period. I would look at the average deal size that closed over that 6-month period and try to go over those type of time frames relative to maybe 1 week or 1 month in a much more transactional business. Yep. I also think that you can provide more scrutiny, more metrics around things like days in stage for an opportunity process, right? Or total personas that are added into an opportunity, and what that means. If you only have 3 people versus 6 people, what's your likelihood of closing the deal? Because you might not be deep enough in the account to actually get to the right buying decision, right? So I think for me, the number one thing is just changing the timeline of what you're measuring. Maybe it's not monthly, maybe it's quarterly. The one thing that I would caution on that, though, is that even if you're going to do a quarterly plan, I think in quarterly run businesses, I think there's definitely kind of a desire to kind of slow down the first week or so. And I think by helping the team understand what they need to be adding on a monthly basis and even a weekly basis can really help try to counteract that. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, I think that was a really, really good question. Another one coming in, I love this question too, because I'm starting to see this as well, is that, there seems to be this new move towards a revenue opportunities team, right? Like we've seen the CRO sort of start to explode a little bit in the last 2 or 3 years as a role, and now that role is turning into a team, which is really supposed to be, I think in theory, it's supposed to be helping align sales and marketing together, right? Helping, force the cats and dogs to live together nicely. Have you guys seen that? Have you seen of it? Have you heard of the revenue ops team? Any thoughts around it? What do you think?
Well, I'm not familiar with what you mean by revenue ops, but we've made a change in our organization where my boss was the head of sales to chief revenue officer, and giving him ownership of demand generation as well as the partner organization. I think if you have an organization that's at a level and a scale that giving control of those groups to the same person that has control over sales, I think that there's pros and cons to it. I think the pros are it helps drive. I mean, if you're somebody that's measuring the KPIs, you're measuring the metrics, and you're understanding what's going on with your business, it could give you the ability to maybe make changes happen faster in organizations that are supportive of your organization, like marketing and sales, right? So I think that's something that I've seen recently. I think that there's pros and cons to it. I think it really just depends on your organization and what your how your leadership is structured, and also depends on having the right leader do it. I think you can't just have anybody jump into that role. That's a pretty big role and opportunity. I think you have to have the right person who has the cross-functional knowledge to be able to manage different types of organizations like that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that I think what we're starting to see is that as we've gotten smarter and we have more data, we're starting to put more humans to think around that data, and I think right now that's sort of where this growth cycle is. I think in the next year or two, we'll start to see more AI around this kind of stuff. But I think that revenue ops thing it's still very new. Enrique, I hope I pronounced your name right. But I think that it's valid because it's either going to tell us that type of team is healthy and valuable in many places, or people are going to realize, you know what, that was something new that we needed to try, and it's not the right thing, but because we figured that out and it wasn't right, here's what we think is going to be the right thing. So I think it's a good thing. I wouldn't dare predict whether or not, oh my gosh, there's going to be a revenue ops team from here till eternity in terms of that, but it makes sense, and I've seen it in a couple of places. I've got one more question, and I know we're at the top of the hour, but I think this is a great question, right? All this planning, all this strategy, all this process stuff is great. So Suzanne wants to know, Suzanne has built a sales training piece for her organization, and everybody's got to go as they're part of their ramp and throughout their ramp. Do you guys have a process for measuring the sales ramping and the sales training prior to people getting on the phone to make sure that that's happening at the early stage of a new rep coming on board? And what are your thoughts around something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. One of the critical hires that we made in the last year, just about a year ago, was sales enablement, and we got a guy, Ken Hulse, who came over from Ring Central to help us build out that organization, and he's been very impactful to training and ramping of our sales team. Yeah, I mean, for me, if I'm a sales leader and I'm looking at my organization, one of the key metrics that I can maybe improve upon that would have an effect on our bottom line would be my ramp time. If there's a way that I can improve that from 4 months to 2 months or 2 months to 1 month, that has absolute implications across the business, across the kind of the ROI and the kind of really the P&L of the organization, and that's absolutely something that we as an organization track and are always looking for ways to improve.
Yeah, I would even go so far, this is my wheelhouse, this is what I do, right, is that sales training and coaching, when done right, is like compounding interest, right? If my training time is 4 weeks and I can get it down to 3.5 weeks, well, in 6 months, I'm going to see a compounding interest on that. If I can get it down to 3 weeks, it's going to be a bigger compounding interest, right? So I love the fact that Suzanne asked that question, and I think it's excellent, and I'm glad we didn't overlook that topic, so thank you. That's really it for the questions from the audience. I want to thank everybody for sticking around for the full hour and sticking over for a minute or two Bobby and Conga, thank you so much for a great presentation, sharing your knowledge and wisdom, obviously for letting me interrupt where you were not rehearsed on your answers. So I appreciate it. So thank you very much. And you know, if there's anything else, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that, Bobby?
Just ping me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Happy to converse. We are finishing our fiscal year and kicking off our SKO the first week of February, so I might be delayed in a response, but would love to chat with another sales leader or two or anybody out there that's interested in talking more.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks to the team behind you who I know who helped put this presentation together and make sure the topic went off well for you too. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.